Hello, this is Professor John Baugh, and I'm starting a series called Problem Solving Modules in Java. And I'd like to take kind of a different approach than I normally would on regular lecture style. In this series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a PDF, which basically has a brief overview of what you need in order to solve the problems at the end of the module. So this may not be sufficient as an entire course, but it might be a good supplement if you're taking a Java course at another college, or maybe you're trying to learn on your own, or you're homeschooling, or you're maybe learning Java on the side with another programming course. This may be sufficient to help you along the way and help you learn how to actually solve problems, because I've noticed a lot of instructional material don't really give you a problem to solve. They essentially just tell you this is how you do this, this is how you do that, have at it. And a lot of people struggle with the actual problems. So what we're going to do is we'll look at the module for today, for this particular session, and I go through and I basically tell you what's required knowledge you need in order to understand how to solve the problems at the end, and then I go over kind of a brief overview. It's not a comprehensive book on the subject, but it does give you a few examples and tries to maybe get your terminology up to speed if you're unfamiliar with some of it or need a refresher. And then at the very end, in this case it's on page 8, I have a few problems, 3 problems in this case, that we're going to work through together today. So the first one says we need to write a program that allows the user to enter a series of non-zero integers. If the user enters 0, it will exit the loop and display the largest and smallest numbers of the numbers that were entered. So I'm going to try to take you through a software engineer's or computer scientist's approach to solving a problem like this. Now these are more in the area of beginner, early, intermediate problems. For some people, they might be a little more complex than others, and maybe you're just learning how to solve problems in general. If Java is your first language and you're just starting, don't be alarmed that you may not understand how to solve these problems when you see them on paper at the back of a book, or your instructor hands them out. Sometimes that can be very intimidating when you first start programming. But regardless, we're going to try to take a look at this, and it will hone your problem solving skills, because learning a programming language is one aspect. Learning the syntax and how to say, how to tell the computer, here's what I want to do. But another aspect is actually solving problems. Once you become a good problem solver, then that's the core of making you a good developer and a good programmer. Once you've learned how to solve the problems, then you can learn it in a language. So right now, we're going to look at this problem. We're going to think about it for a minute. Write a program that allows the user to enter a series of non-zero integers. So we know right away that the program is going to require that we allow the user to enter some sort of data. So we need to know, how does Java allow us to enter data? If the user enters a 0, it will exit the loop and display the largest and smallest numbers of the numbers that were entered. So we know we're dealing with integers, and we know that we're dealing with user input, and we know that we're dealing with a series of integers. So that means more than one, probably. If the user enters a 0, exits the loop, so we know that there's a loop involved. All right, and we want to get the maximum, the largest, and the minimum, the smallest, numbers of the numbers that were entered. So let's see if we can take a crack at this. I have Eclipse open right here. This is Kepler, but most versions of Eclipse, even if you have a slightly older or you get a slightly newer one, you're watching this video later on, this is Kepler Service Release 2. Most Eclipse has been relatively the same in terms of how you create projects and work in that manner. So we're going to create a new Java project. I'm going to go to File, New Java Project. Then I'm going to call the project Module 1, Exercises. We can leave it to go with Java 1.6. Just hit finish, and it'll create an empty project for us. We have a source folder right here. I'm going to right click this, go to new, class. And this particular one, let's think of a good name. So we have to deal with a series of numbers and then get the maximum minimum. So I'm going to call this particular project min max. All right, and I'm going to create a package name. Package names are usually written in what we call reverse DNS notation or reverse URL notation. This means that it looks like a website address and it's backwards. You do not have to own the website that you type in. So for example, I do own profjpbaugh.com. That's where you can find the actual learning materials, profjpbaugh.com. But the package name does not have to be a website that you own. You could just make up something. But I usually use my website, com.profjpbaugh, and I call it module 1. Then I'm going to hit finish. So it generates an empty skeleton class for us, and we need to make a main method. Okay, so we've got our main method here, and let's look at the problem again. We want to write a program that allows the user to enter a series of non-zero integers. So what do we need here? We know we have to have user input, so we have to have a scanner. We'll use a scanner class. You'll recall that getting standard input, we create a scanner based on system.in. You'll notice it's underlining this because the scanner class is not part of java.lang. It's not part of the Java language itself. So we have to import it. So if I hover over this, actually Eclipse has a kind of a nice feature here where it allows us to do an import automatically by just clicking here. So it's import scanner, which is in java.util. So I click that and you'll notice now there's an import statement at the top. So we know that we need to have an integer to keep track of input, right? So I'm just going to initialize that to 0 just to be good software, good practice to initialize your variables. Whether or not the language you're working on does it automatically. We'll have max and min set to 0, so we know we need to deal with those. Now, what was the condition that we had for the loop? It says if the user enters as 0, it will exit the loop and display the largest and smallest numbers, so the max and the min. So we'll get a loop ready here. We have while input not equal to 0. So because the 0 is the condition that will break out of the loop. Often I put comments, even though the programming environment, the IDE, often lines up curly braces for you. I often put a comment at the end of my loops, for example, loops and if statements and methods and other blocks of code in order to so I can keep track of what block of code belongs to what. It's usually easier for me to do that. So I've got a while loop and I'm saying, well, the input is not equal to 0. But you might scratch your head a little bit and think, well, what am I going to do here? I've got while input is not equal to 0, but where did the input come from to go into the loop to start with? Well, we can do what's called a priming read. So we've got a priming read right here, and we've got we'll just say this, we'll say system.out.println. We'll say please enter a non-zero integer or 0 to exit. Okay, so we have to get the input from the user. How do we get the user input? Well, we know it's an integer. Input equals. Now we want to say keyboard, which is our scanner, dot next int. So this will get at the first int that we're working on. While input is not equal to 0, we're going to do something with the data that we obtain. So before the loop starts, we have to make a little bit of an assumption here. We're going to say that the max is equal to the input and the min is equal to the input, because that's the first value they've entered. So that's obviously our maximum and our minimum. If we've only got one item in our set of data, that means that that's the maximum and the minimum of that set, because there's only one item. That's the occurrence when you have only one item. You're going to have a situation where the max and the min are the same. So now we're saying while input is not equal to 0. What are we going to do now? Well, we're going to do the same thing essentially that we did outside the loop. I could actually copy and paste if I wanted to. I'm going to say, please enter a non-zero integer or 0 to exit. Input is equal to keyboard.nextInt. And then here's where it's different. We're asked to give the ultimate or global maximum and minimum of the data that the user enters. So we don't know how many pieces of data the user is going to enter. So how are we going to figure that out? Well, we're looping through. So think about it. If the input that the user enters is ever larger than what we currently say is our maximum, then obviously that maximum is not the maximum anymore. What's the maximum at that point? The user's input. So here's what I'm going to say. If the input is greater than the maximum, then what do? We set the max equal to the input. So we'll say input is the new maximum. Okay. Similarly with minimum, if the input is less than the minimum, obviously the minimum that we currently have is not the minimum. So that means that the new minimum is equal to input. All right. So that's pretty much all we need. Now what do? We're going to say system.out.println maximum is max, and then system.out.println minimum is. All right. Let's see if this works. I'm going to run the code, and then down at the bottom it says please enter a non-zero integer or 0 to exit. Let's put a 15. I'm going to put a 25, a -6, a 37, a 94, a 2, a -17, and then I'm going to enter a 0 because I'm done. So I enter a 0, and then it tells me that the maximum I entered is a 94, which is the case. If we go through all the numbers and look, we'll see that the highest number we entered was a 94. And then the minimum was a -17. So that worked pretty well. We can run it one more time just to make sure we have a little bit more of an example. If you enter a 0 right away, it will not ask you again. It'll just say minimum, maximum, maximum or 0, and you're done. Run it again. We'll say 100, -150, 25, 7, 17, 17, 16, 50, -5, and 0. So tell me, maximum's 100, minimum's 150. That's what we expect. So that's all we need for problem 1. So problem 1 is done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at problem 2. Problem 2 says to write a program that generates a triangle made of asterisks, which are the little stars. If you hit the Shift 8 key on the keyboard, that gives you an asterisk. It's also used as the multiplication symbol. If it's not printed as a string, it's used as the multiplication symbol, multiplication operator in Java. It says starting at 1 asterisk at the top, and whatever the user enters as num stars. So that's going to be a variable. They're telling us in the problem, hey, use this variable name. If they didn't tell you, you just make up one that made sense. They'll say user enters as num stars at the bottom. So if the user enters 6, then the triangle will look like this. So it starts with 1 asterisk at the top, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. If you look very carefully, you'll note that this triangle has how many rows? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the number of rows is actually num stars. And the largest number of stars at the bottom is num stars. So we got to think through this problem. Well, how are we going to do it? Can I do it with a single loop? Well, not in a really good way. If we start writing this, let's make a new class here. Right click, go to new, then class. I'll call this stars. I'm going to create a main method again. Okay, so I know I'm going to have num stars. I know I'm going to have to get user input, so I'm going to make a scanner, keyboard, new scanner based on system.out.println dot in, and again it'll say, I don't recognize scanner, so we have to import scanner, which is in java.util. So right away we know we're going to have to ask the user, please enter the number of stars. Then it's going to be num stars. We could also initialize num stars at the top. Again, I like doing that. So num stars is equal to keyboard dot nextInt. So we've got the number of stars by that point. Let's use a for loop this time. Let's try this. I equals, well, we know we're going to start with 1 star, and then we're going to say, as long as I is less than or equal to num stars, I++. Let's see if we can do this. Let's say in for here. Now, what happens if I print out, I'll just say print a star. Okay, that might be our thought of the day. We're going to print out a star. So I'm going to run it and see what happens at the bottom. So when I enter a 5, I get, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 stars. Okay, well, that's kind of okay, but it doesn't seem exactly what we want. So you have to think to yourself, what's the problem here? Well, we have to consider we don't just want to print the bottom row. We want to print every row starting at 1 star going all the way up to the last row. So you can use what's called a nested for loop. We do know that we need to print out the asterisk, but we have to think about what do we want to do. So the first, this outer loop actually takes care of the number of rows. So for the first row, what do we want to print out? And the first time we want to print 1 star, then we want to print 2 stars, then we want to print 3, then we want to print 4. So every row we're on, the row number actually also serves to tell us how many stars we should be printing. So we have int I equals 1. So the first row will only print out 1 star. Once this loop, this outer loop, executes, I will be 2 on the second run. As long as 2 is less than num stars, that will tell us that the row should print out, or the stars should be 2. There should be 2 stars. So that means we need an inner loop here. So I'm going to say int j. Now, what do we set it to? Well, we set it to 0, or we could set it to 1. We'll do that. We could do that if we wanted to. We'll set it to 1, and then we'll say j less than I. Yeah, let's do 0. I think 0 is going to work better. We could do I plus 1, but we'll do j less than I for now, and then j++. We'll fiddle around with this and we'll see if it works. So we'll say system.out.print line. Well, we don't want print line. Do we want print or print line? We've got to ask ourselves that. I'm going to say print because we don't want the stars that are printed on each row to be printed on an additional row every time. We want to wait until it prints this row. Then what do we want to do? After it prints that row, we want to then put an empty line. So the first time through here, let's see if this makes sense. We start at 1, so that means j equals 0, j less than 1. It's going to print out 1 star, then go up here, and it's going to print out none. So good. Prints a line, goes to the next row. Then I is going to be 2 on that side. J is going to start at 0. It's going to print out 1, 2, and then it's going to break out and go down here. It's going to keep going like that. Let's see if this works, and if it doesn't, we'll fix it. Please enter the number of stars. I'll say 5. I hit enter, and it looks pretty good. I've got 1, and then the second row is 2, third row is 3, fourth row is 4, fifth row is 5. So that's pretty much what we want. It looks good to me. So we've finished this one pretty well. Let's do another run just to make sure what it does. If I do 0, it doesn't print anything. If I hit it again, let's type 10. It'll make another triangle, and you can verify that there are 10 rows, and then there are 10 asterisks at the bottom. So we've solved this one now. So we've got problem 1 and problem 2 solved. Now we're going to write a third one. This says we should write a program that takes 5 grades, 0 to 100, on the project submitted by a student. Once the user has entered these grades, you display the percentage of the student and then tell them what letter grade they received. And then we have a list of grades here. So an A is 90 to 100, a B is 80 to 89, a C is 70 to 79, a D is 60 to 69, and then an F is anything below 60. Well, that should be below 60. I'll fix that in the project. So it's below 60. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another class. This one's going to be, we'll call it grades. I'll fix that in the PDF. So public static void main string args. All right. So what are our requirements here? Well, we know that we should write a program that takes 5 grades. Okay, great. So we know there's a loop involved. We could do it without a loop, but we're going to do it with a loop because it's easier. So we know there's a loop here. It's going to go from 0 to 4 essentially because it's less than 5. So that's going to do 5 times. So we know that. And we know that the grades have to be, or the grades are going to be 0 to 100. We'll assume that the user enters the correct value. I'll leave it as an exercise to you if you want to try to determine if the user does not enter a grade in this range, then just how to continue the for loop. And I can give you, there's several ways to do it, but you could use a continue statement and also increment I or decrement I once to make up for that if they entered the wrong value. That's one way to do it. But we'll assume that we'll enter good numbers, 0 to 100. And once the user has entered these grades, you display the percentage of the student and then tell them what letter grade they received. So these percentages here, this one should be 60, not 69. These percentages here are based on their total divided by the total number of grades that you entered, which is 5. So we know that we need a variable to keep track of the user's input. So I'm going to say int input, and then I'm going to say int total. We'll set both of these to 0. And then ultimately we need an average percentage, and the average is not necessarily going to be an integer. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say double percentage 0.0. Inside of this loop, we're going to say, please enter a value. And what are we forgetting? Well, we need user input, so what do we need? Oh yeah, that's right, scanner. So we need a scanner. New scanner, system.in, and then again, it doesn't recognize scanner, so we hover over it and we know it's in java.util. Click it to import it. And now we say please enter a value. So input's going to equal keyboard.nextInt. So you obtain an int each time. Then you take the total and we say plus equals the input. Now, this is the same as total equals total plus input. It's shortcut. It's a shortcut. It's a compound operator. Plus equals. Compound assignment operator, or compound addition assignment operator. So we go through and we get the 5 grades, we get the total. Now how do we figure out the average? We want the percentage, right? So we say, what's the total divided by 5.0. Now you might wonder, why am I using 5.0 and not 5? Well, there's something very interesting you should keep in mind about Java. Percentage is a double. So we know that we need a double. Total is an integer, and then if I were to write 5, that would be an integer. If it took that integer and divided it by this as an integer, then the result would be an integer. It would truncate or remove any kind of data. So if I had some value that was not evenly divisible by 5 here, and we divide it by 5, it would truncate whatever the decimal part is, and then the percentage, even though it's a double, the percentage would be the double format of this truncated value here. So if I put 5.0 here, that says recognize this value as a floating point value, a double in this case, and then divide it, do floating point division instead of integer division. So this is how we're going to get our correct answer. So we're going to say, it says that they want us to print out the value, so we'll say your percentage is, okay. And you might think, well, we're partially done, but I'm not too comfortable with this. I don't know if it's going to work. So you should test it. You can test it, okay? This is an incremental test. This means we're going to test it out just to see if this part's working. We're going to enter 100, and we'll say 95, then 92, 74, and 63. And it'll say your percentage is 84.8. If you wanted to, you could get a calculator and verify that these values are correct and that this seems to be the right value here. But it seems to be working so far. So that's kind of the first part. Now, we want a letter grade. So the chart here, if it were correct, would say 60 here, below 60. So we have 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, 70 to 79 is a C, 60 to 69 is a D, and then below 60 is an F. So how do we take into account this? Well, we've used the repetition control structures, iterative control structures, such as the for loop and the while loop. The other would be the do while loop, which we haven't used. We also have selection control structures, also known as conditional control structures. What we're going to do here is we're going to say if the percentage, we'll just say greater than 90 because we said that the users shouldn't enter anything above 100, but we'll say if the percentage is greater than 90, you can't get higher than an A as a letter grade. So we're just going to say you got an A. All right? That's if they get greater than 90. Now we're going to say else if. We're going to use cascading if statements here. We'll say if the percentage is greater than 80 and percentage is less than 90. Okay, actually the percentage up here should be greater than or equal to 90 as an A, because we said 90 to 100. We'll assume this is inclusive. Okay, so that's why I said 89 here. All right, so we've got percentage is greater than 80, and then it's strictly less than 90. We're going to say, system.out.println, you got a B. Right? Then, if the percentage is greater than 70 strictly and less than 80, in this case, this one's going to be less than or greater than or equal to, and then we'll say system.out.println, you got a C, else if percentage is greater than or equal to 60 and percentage is less than 70, what are we going to say? What's their grade then? Well, we were at C, so now we're at D. You got a D. And then finally, there's only really one thing left here. We don't have to put an if statement here because this is the only other option. If it's greater than or equal to 90, it's 100, so that takes the upper end out of the equation. We keep going down, and then if we end up the value is 59 or below, or anything below 60, 59 point something, then we're going to say that they got an F. All right, so let's see if this works. I'm going to run the program. This time we're going to enter a value 100, 70, 85, 87, and 92. And it'll say your percentage is 86 and you got a B. Okay, well let's have someone with extremely good grades. Say 100, 100, 98, 92, 89. So let's say it's 95.8, you got an A. Okay, let's deal with someone with really bad grades. So let's say they get a 72 on the first exam, and then later on they get a 60, then they get a 55 and a 27 because they really didn't study that night, and then a 35 they also didn't study very well. So let's say the percentage is 49.8, you got an F. So we've pretty much covered all our bases and done a pretty decent amount of testing. So we're pretty satisfied that this works. So I will upload this code as well as the correction to the PDF right here. But I encourage you to go to profjpbaugh.com, and to look at the modules. I've also got modules or tutorials for other languages that I had started on and never really finished yet, but I'm intending on working more on this module if there's interest in it. And please feel free to email me, profjpbaugh@gmail.com. Thanks and have a great day.